So a little over a week ago, I was browsing around online looking for some new interesting handhelds to try out, and I found something really interesting, the M17. So the strange thing about the M17 was when I first saw it on Temu, it was $68, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. I've never heard of this before. I've never seen any YouTubers try it out, so let's Google this and find some more information about it. And when I did, much to my surprise, there was nothing online about it. There was no reviews, there was no videos on YouTube about it. I couldn't find it on any other platforms, so naturally I decided to buy it. And now when I'm recording this review, a few other YouTubers, I think 2, have made reviews of it, and I can find a couple posts on Reddit about it. So I paid $68 for this on Temu. And I'll say that price is a little bit high because you can find it on AliExpress for a little bit under $50 right now. Or if you're a new user to Temu, you can get a new user discount of 50% off, up to $50. So it'll probably be also a little under $50 if you get that. I'll put some information down in the description if you want to get that deal and how to get it specifically, and maybe I'll talk about it later. But I paid 68 bucks for it, but you should expect right now to pay under $50 for it. And taking this thing out of the box, it looks really good for about 50 bucks. There's no frills here. You just get the system itself and a charger and a manual, and that's about it. Nothing too exciting, but I mean, really, what more do you want, honestly? So taking a look at the M17, you have 2 analog sticks, a D-pad, and then on top a volume up and volume down button, and then under that you have a start and select button, both on the opposite sides of the screen. It looks a little strange, but I kind of like the choice. You have R1, R2, and L1, L2. They're pretty clicky, and I think they feel pretty good quality. Same with the analog sticks, and the D-pad isn't perfect, but it's pretty good. You know, for $50, there isn't too much room to complain, but I think everything here is completely usable and nothing that's worth complaining for a long period of time about. It could have some improvements, sure, but it's nothing that's going to ruin your gameplay in any of these games, honestly. And then looking at the top, we have a power switch, your micro SD card slot, and of course you have a micro SD card that comes with it, which if you want to be smart, you probably should back up because these generic micro SD cards that come with these are notoriously cheap and could fail. So if you want to be safe, do that. A 3.5mm headphone jack, and a USB-C port. And taking a look at the back, you have one speaker, which isn't great. It can get pretty loud, but it's good. It's about what you'd expect for $50. I don't have too much to say about it. Okay, so upon powering this on, you're going to see a loading screen, and once that loading screen goes away, you're going to see it's Emulate. And it's pretty interesting for a budget device like this to have Emulate. I actually really like the interface. It's basically a horizontal slideshow of the different consoles you can emulate. So I think it always boots the PSP if I'm not mistaken, and then you can go through every single console you want to emulate. And if you stay on the system for more than a few seconds, it's going to pop up with how many games it has loaded onto the micro SD card. And you see there's a lot of systems on here that have quite a few games preloaded. And yeah, there's not a whole lot more than that. You can press the start button and get into your settings. And looking at the settings, you can see there's not a whole lot here. You have backlight settings, which is just going to be your brightness, system settings, which is just information, which shows your version, and then language, and then restore default settings. So you'll see right here, it's very, very limited. It's very scaled back. There's many devices out there that are much cheaper than this, that have better settings than this, and are much more full featured. But for a lot of people, you're not going to need more than that. And maybe custom firmware could even be developed for this in the future, which could improve the settings and add a lot more functionality to this. But for now, it's still certainly playable. You also have the ability to search for games, which is really helpful because there's thousands of games on here. So what can this emulate? I'm going to start off first with PSP emulation. So PSP emulation is kind of hit or miss. I think that's expected for such a cheap device like this. I wouldn't expect that for something under $50 you could emulate PSP very well, but there's a lot of PSP games that can work pretty good. For example, here is me playing Tekken. I think it's Tekken 5 off the top of my head, but I'm sorry if I get that wrong. And it mostly runs very well. It's not absolutely perfect, but it's pretty good, and I had a lot of fun playing it. I just sat around testing this thing out, seeing, okay, is it actually going to keep working? You know, is there going to be points where the performance drops? And yeah, there are points in which the performance drops, like after you get knocked out. For example, there's some kind of like celebration scene, I don't know what they actually call it, where clearly it's not running at full speed, it's very choppy, but the actual fights themselves run very well and are completely playable. And there's many other PSP games that are certainly playable on this. There's not a whole lot to say about it. The ones that work do work, and it comes preloaded with a few that do work very well. But I'll say that the version that I bought, which came with a 64GB micro SD card, I think it also comes with a 128GB micro SD card if you want to pay a few more dollars for it. The one that I bought came with a lot of PSP games that didn't work. For example, Grand Theft Auto Vice City Stories isn't going to work super well, but there's a few PSP games that come with this that work well. And again, if you get the 120GB micro SD card, there's probably going to be more on there, I would imagine. And of course, you always have the option of bringing your own games onto the micro SD card and playing those. So you're going to have to do some testing and see which games work, but there's a lot that do, and it's not going to be one of those things where every game won't work and it's completely worthless. You can play some PSP on here and have fun. But when it comes to N64, which is something this was advertised to me as being able to play, it does come with its own N64 emulator in here, and I was excited to try it out. I was like, yes, N64, this is going to be a really, really interesting thing. But when I tried it out, it wasn't so good. There were points in games, for example, like Super Mario 64, where it appeared to be running at full speed and running well, but then other points in the game were just bad. They were just bad. And I tested a few other games out like Ocarina of Time, and again, it was the same thing. There were points where it was playable and it looked pretty good and it was fun, but then there were other points where it really just slowed down, and I imagine as you progress in the game, it probably would get even worse. Again, maybe in the future, if there was custom firmware, it could run a lot better and you could get good performance on more PSP games or N64 games, but yeah, they're not running so hot right now. For the most part, N64 games will not work at all. Sometimes they will, but PSP games, you'll find a lot that do work. So if you want to get this for a certain PSP emulation, if you want to test it out, or you have a friend that bought it or whatever, and you want to see, does this game run on there? Yeah, if you have a few games you like and they work on here, I think this is great for PSP emulation. It's certainly a great value. And also, there's PlayStation 1 emulation on here. So PlayStation 1 emulation works pretty good on here, certainly better than PSP and N64. Most PlayStation 1 games I tried out worked very well. Sometimes there were tiny performance drops, but they were still completely playable. There were games though that just were unplayable. For example, Crash Nitro Kart. Nah, I really wish it did work because I loved that game so much when I was a kid, but on here, unfortunately, it was not playing at full speed or anywhere close to it. So yeah, I'll say there's going to be some games on here that aren't going to run at full speed, but there's a lot that will work completely fine and you'll have a lot of fun playing. So I think it's safe to say that most PlayStation 1 games would work pretty well. Not every single one, but a lot would. So if you want to buy this for PlayStation 1, I would say, yeah, probably it'll be fine for that. Depending on what you want to play, maybe try to find some other YouTuber who's done a review, or find someone who's bought this already and see if they can test it out for you. If there's one specific game you play all the time and you want to know if it runs on here. But I would say this is good for most PlayStation 1 games. And of course you have the ability to play tons of other older consoles. I'm not going to focus on that too much because I think it should go without saying that if you can emulate PSP, NES is going to run fine. Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, Game Boy, SNES works great. They all work really good. So I'm going to show you guys some gameplay from these old systems, but I don't want to go too much in depth because I didn't test everything out, but what I did test worked great, and that shouldn't be too surprising. So with all things considered, would I recommend buying this? I would say it depends on what you want. So of course it can emulate some PlayStation Portable games, it can emulate a lot of PS1 games, it can't emulate any N64 games. So yeah, if you want it just for N64 emulation, of course not, don't get it. If you want it just for PlayStation Portable PSP emulation, I wouldn't recommend getting it if that's all you want it for, because there's some games, again, that do work very well on here, but there's a lot that don't. So if you want this specifically for PSP, I would say don't get it for that. But what would you get this for? What would be a good, in my opinion, reason to buy this? I would say a good reason to buy this is you want a cheap retro handheld that might even be a little bigger. Maybe you want something with a bigger screen, it isn't so tiny. This thing is pretty big. So if you want something that's a little bigger, you want to play some Game Boy Advance games on it, you want to play some Sega Genesis, you want to play some SNES or NES or arcade games, even some PS1 games on it, and that's mainly what you're looking for, I would say, yeah, definitely buy that, and then treat the ability to play PSP games as an afterthought, but one that's really positive, because there's a lot of PSP games that work on here and are pretty impressive that they do for something that's under $50. So if that's just for you, an afterthought, something you'd enjoy playing and is definitely pleasant, yeah, I would buy it if that's something you're after. But you have to keep in mind that there are problems, like the settings are pretty limited, the screen isn't great, it's still playable, like I said, it's not something that I would say is worth not buying it, it's just not not perfect. It could be better. You know, there's negatives like that. There's the battery life, which lasts maybe around 2 hours. It's 2000 milliamp hours, so it's not a great battery, but it should be fine for most use. And you also have to keep in mind that some of the problems, like the issues with the limited settings, definitely could be in the future improved with custom firmware or some kind of official software update, which has happened before. Actually, it's probably a rarity, but it has happened. Usually we have to rely on the community for those things, but it could be improved in the future. It's not like a hardware issue or something. So again, it's kind of an unknown brand, so who knows if there's going to be problems down the line with them not lasting super long or whatever. I don't know. I just bought this thing like a week ago, as did everyone else who bought these, because as far as I can tell, it's brand new. But as far as I can tell, this thing is a really great value, and if you really considered it and you decided something you want to buy, I would certainly not fault you for that. And I think it could be a really great purchase that in the future maybe even might increase in price if custom firmware is developed, especially. But if more people find out about this, they're viewed by bigger YouTubers or bigger social media accounts on other platforms, yeah, I think that this thing could increase in value and could be something that's more highly coveted than it is today. So I'll put some links down in the description if you want to buy it. Like I said, I bought this on Temu, but if you're a new user to Temu, you can get their 50% off new user discount. The way you get that is you need to download Temu through the link in the description and then buy the system from the link in the description as well. And then upon checkout, you need to use the code that I provide down there as well. And also you need to make sure that you buy the M17 within 1 hour of you downloading Temu, otherwise they won't give you that new user discount. I know it's kind of weird, but that's just how they do it. I'll also put a link down below where you can buy this for pretty cheap on AliExpress as well. It's probably not going to be as cheap as the Temu new user discount, but you can still get it for pretty cheap on AliExpress as well, a little under $50 at the moment. So yeah guys, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more retro handheld content like this, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Have a great rest of your day. Bye bye.